Hello, welcome to yet another episode of Data in Motion Leadership Series, a smart talk with one of the data leaders in the space today. We welcome Manish Devgan, one of my good friends and ex-colleagues from a previous life. Manish Devgan is a product executive with a proven track record of delivering industry-leading software. He has successfully led the development of numerous products at companies like BEA Systems, Oracle, Terracotta, Software AG, which is where we both work together, full disclaimer, and Hazelcast. Manish is an innovator and holds several patents. Most recently, he was the chief product officer at Hazelcast, where he helped build a category-leading real-time data platform for application developers, application builders, leveraging streaming data, low-latency data store, and real-time ML and AI. In his free time, Manish likes to go on long walks while listening to Punjabi music. All right, that's a good background. Manish, so thankful that you have joined us for this episode. So thank you so much for joining in on this conversation. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Dinesh. Glad to be here.
So we started the series primarily to discuss with data leaders like you, primarily to talk about data in motion. Data in motion, again, we'll go into a little bit of the semantics of why it is called data in motion. But in the context of some of these broader applications that data is being used at, and particularly the topic for today pertaining to Gen AI type of applications, and particularly with your background with ML and AI and real-time data platforms, I think it makes super sense for you to be a guest on this particular episode. So I'm so excited about talking about this particular topic. I want to start off this conversation talking about data in motion and data at rest. I think this is something that has been around our circles for quite a bit. And I want to draw the distinction between these two, and again, going back a few years from some of the companies that I worked with, we drew that distinction very clearly about what is data at rest versus what is data in motion. And most recently, a few months ago, I put together this ecosystem map that kind of draws out this picture of how I look at it from my POV, and I want to share that with you and ask about your perspective on how you look at it as well. So let me just share my screen real quickly. So if you look at the screen, the way I'm looking at this entire ecosystem of vendors and their offerings and how they are offering their different products in this particular space is how the entire data flows through the system. Like, for example, it could be we are talking about different types of data: unstructured data, structured data, data streams, and so forth, all of them coming through some kind of a pipeline mechanism. And the more modern these data pipelines are getting, we are talking about the not only the capabilities to connect the data, connect to the different data sources, ingest them, process them, analyze them in real time, and so forth. And then as we start doing that, now is where the distinction starts becoming very clear as to what you do with the data. Is it data that is in a state of constantly incoming into the enterprise that you are ingesting, as well as you wanting to leverage that in real time and analyzing it in real time, which makes it this particular branch, which is data in motion, or this other aspect where you say, let me collect all this data, let me put it into some kind of a data warehouse or a store where I can then process it, at a later point for more meaningful analytics and so forth, looking at the big picture rather than what is immediately happening at this second, at this very moment. So there is this notion of data at rest and data in motion, where the data lands versus what you're doing with active data that is still coming in through the enterprise. And then eventually all those lead into these different applications, at the top that has been represented here, whether you're talking about data applications, data science, ML-based applications, or so forth. So I want to pause here. I want to say that, as we look at the different types of personas that are, using these mechanisms to access the data, how do you look at it? How do you look at this picture, or maybe from your own POV, from your own experience? What is data in motion to you, and how do you look at this particular landscape?
Yeah, so that distinction is interesting, right? And I think that distinction is also shows how we have come here, the journey behind that. It's interesting because, data is in motion when it is born, always, right? A customer record is created when a customer gets acquired, right? Or is acquired. So these, in some ways, are just intermediate states. Like in the past decade or so, the software tech stack has allowed people to tap into fresh insights as the data is moving. I think that's what is new. And this is, again, over and above the data analytics tools that have been serving the data at rest. For example, a database, a data lake, data warehouse, and more recently, like a lake house. What's interesting here is for the data in motion, what I call fresh data, is that transport layer. So there is a lot of new products which actually serve as a transport layer for data in motion, like Kafka and Red Panda, and then also the advent of stream processing systems like Flink. And those have become mainstream.
Yep.
And that's the reason why people have been able to tap into the value of this fresh data. And especially also, I see the new technologies like streaming databases and real-time analytic technologies like Apache Pinot. There are many tools and technologies that help make decisions, better actions, better analytics, all leveraging this fresh data and data in motion. I think that's what has changed.
Fantastic. No, I love that description right there. And you touched on something which is data freshness. The freshness of the data is super relevant when it talk about data in motion. I think that's something that I've talked in the past as well. The value of the data and how data decays over a certain time, or at least the value of the data decaying over a certain time and all that. So I think that's a very important factor to consider when you differentiate between data at rest versus data in motion. But thank you so much for that. But if you want to elaborate on that, if you say, what is the importance of data in motion in the terms of the value it creates, right? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more? Like, for example, when I think about, let's say, IoT in the broader context, we are talking about thousands of devices, emanating all these different, sensor data that is coming in through in every few seconds, or even every second and so forth. And you're collecting all this data, and this data means something in that particular moment, and the freshness of the data matters a lot. So it may be a thing about predictive maintenance, in the context of manufacturing. And you look at this data and you go like, well, this particular machine is overheating. Let me just look at it in real time, right? So there is a notion of how you're able to proactively, predictively say that something is going to fail. And that boils down to the fact that the freshness of the data has created that value for you, right? Do you see at it the same way, in your experience, looking at real-time data platforms and so forth? How are you looking at it? And let me just stop the screen so we can get back to talking.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think that's a really important question. The importance of data in motion in terms of the value it creates. So the way I look at it, and I think this is I've seen in many customers, the more recent the data, the more value it has. There is a term called perishable insights. The more time passes, the more it feels like you're making a decision, looking into the rear view mirror, right? So in broad brush strokes, you're essentially making tomorrow's decisions based on today's data if you're ignoring data in motion. I remember working with a customer, one of the largest machine builders in the world. They build these paint robots for the assembly line of high-end cars. Now, based on the current data coming in through the pressure sensors on that robotic arm, the predictive model can shut the process before it is too late. And the paint job does not go bad, right? So the process of painting on a high-end car is so expensive. So there is a huge value of fresh data. So that's where data in motion is so very critical for these kind of use cases.
So we probably went a little back and forth on a couple of things. One is data in motion, the freshness of the data, and I loved your description on perishable insights, which is absolutely important. And then there is the notion of real time as well, that when it comes to data in motion. How do you see that correlation? Again, this goes back to a lot of examples. For example, healthcare, when you talk about patient telemetry, there is that importance of real-time data, because you got all these biometric devices attached to patients, and suddenly if something is off, you need to be able to detect that anomaly, understand the false positives, and be able to proactively, predictively tell the doctors or send alerts and say this particular patient is in need of healthcare right away. So how do you look at that kind of distinction, or is there like, they're one and the same, or, how do you view that particular correlation between real time and data in motion?
Yeah, that's another good one. The term real time is an interesting one, right? The actual engineering definition, how the builders and developers think about it, is often when one can respond with predictable latency. That is, there is a deterministic timeline. That's how that's what real time means to a developer or a builder. But for business, real time simply means fast, right? It's within the boundaries of the business SLA. So it depends on what your business SLA is. If your business SLA for a fraud detection system is 5 milliseconds, that is what is considered real time, right? But for other businesses, it may be different. So in how I see the real-time data platforms, the data in motion really corresponds to fresh data, like we talked about. And if you look at the examples for some of these use cases, which I've encountered, like for IoT, it could be data from connected products. So like cars, compressors, robotic arms I talked about, right? And then in a simple kind of data ecosystem, it could be CDC from a database log. It could be transactional data from point of sales. It could be location data or any data coming across the enterprise messaging system like Kafka, right? So all that is really useful in a real-time data platform. And that's what data in motion is typically. Those are the examples of data in motion.
There is also a little confusion or maybe lack of clarity around this term real-time data platform. So maybe, while we are on this topic, can we just touch on that before we move on to like other areas? What is your view of what a real-time data platform is? Because I have sold, marketed, real-time end-to-end streaming platforms and so forth. And then there is this notion of real-time data platforms that has been redefined by different analysts in different contexts and all that. The general broad sense is that it has the capability to do data ingestion. It has the capability to do real-time data processing of the streams, and it has the ability to create those real-time insights based on the processing that it has done. But is there a different way to look at it, or are there like other checkpoints that we need to look for in a real-time data platform? What do you think is your definition or view of the real-time data platform space?
Yeah, I mean, there are platforms, and then there are also these things called solutions. Solutions are mostly systems who are actually targeting a particular vertical, for example. But platform is more in a general way where you can build, in multiple domains. Some of the critical capabilities are the ones you mentioned, like a real-time data management capability, a capability to process streams, a capability to actually apply real-time machine learning algorithms, right? And things like that. But I think sometimes you don't really need stream processing per se in a real-time data platform, because sometimes it's just about latency. It's a request response system, and I want to pull up that customer record, if I'm in a call center while I'm speaking the first sentence with my customer, right? That quickly. So for that, you don't really need stream processing. You just need a quick way, with predictable latency at scale, to be able to pull up that customer information. That is real time for a lot of use cases. So I think it depends, I would say. But yeah, this is an area where, again, there's a huge value of fresh data in a real-time use case. The huge value. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. No, that's fantastic. Thank you. It is important to get these different perspectives, and this is what I'm trying to do with these episodes, gathering these kinds of insights from data leaders like you, because everybody does bring in their unique value into how they look at it from their vantage point. And I totally appreciate what you just said.